Şimdi de Gökhan Bey sanıyorum bazı sorular soracaktır Marsa'ya ama arkasından sizlerin de soruları varsa şayet belirli zamanımızın aralığında birkaç tane alabileceğimizi düşünüyorum. Buyurun.
İlk önce İngilizce geçeceğim. I'm going to talk in English. You talk about the ground plane and civic space. And you started in landscape architecture, but you sort of moved up strategically to this area called the ground plane and civic space. Can you sort of define what that is exactly? What is the ground plane and the civic space, and why is that? Why did that become more relevant to your work than more central to your work?
Can you hear me? Yeah. Why did it become more central? That's a good question, but I mean, there's a certain satisfaction, first of all, in allowing people to use the space and to actually opening it up to the public. And I think the public is really important. It's us. So I really enjoy it when I see people using and having fun in these places. So I started off by doing these public art projects. I didn't show them, but then it kind of went to bigger and bigger spaces.
How do you define this ground plane, or what is, for somebody that doesn't know, what kind of things are involved? I mean, you showed examples of it, of your work, but if you're walking around a city, what is that ground plane consist of in an average city?
Well, for me, it's simple. It's everything outside the building, and sometimes in the building too. It's everything. It's where we walk on the earth. So, I mean, the majority of our ground plane in our cities are streets. You have sidewalks, service corridors, parking lots, entry plazas, not very much of that, street tree areas, on and off ramps.
These areas, they're not technically part of what one would think of landscape architecture.
No.
They're sort of like secondary spaces.
Yes.
Why is it that these areas, for example, architects in designing buildings, they're not so concerned with these areas? Why are these areas sort of left off of the
Exactly.
Of the map? Why do you think they're left off of the...
Why? Well, because how many people are architects here? Could I see? Whoa, okay. Well, I won't say anything bad about architects then, right? No. I mean, honestly, architects are concerned with the formal and sculptural aspects of an object. And that's great. That's what they do. But when it comes down to the ground plane, they're just not that interested in it. It's not their thing. Landscape architects, why aren't there more landscape architects who are interested in it? Because it's not green. So most of the areas that we actually live and work in and see, nobody really cares or thinks about or advocates for. It's a huge missing piece of the way we think. I don't know. Why do you think?
Well, you have these famous analysis of American suburban space. We're looking at these big box stores in suburbia, and it's mainly just parking lots and sort of sidewalks with very little green. Is it? It seems like these areas were in them all, in Istanbul. We're in these parking lots and these walkways all the time in the city, but they're not designed and somebody doesn't care about them.
Nobody cares.
Now the landscape architect is now in these areas. What value do you think you provide as a landscape architect to designing these spaces that maybe, as an architect that doesn't have that kind of knowledge? What are the values of landscape architecture that you've learned that now you can apply to some of these? I'm speaking ecologically, of course.
Nothing. If you're talking about kind of big box environments,
But in general, these spaces, do you think the landscape architect is better suited to designing these spaces versus the architect?
Well, gosh, The problem, if I go back to the big box topic, which are super, well, it's a nasty typology because they're very cheap buildings. I mean, no architect is involved in Walmart. And part of their charm is that you can drive there and that everything is designed to take shopping at Christmas time. But it's the rules and the regulations and the zoning that allows Walmart to go in and just cover everything with asphalt. Now, the rules may say that for every 100 parking spaces, there's got to be a tree. What does that do? Nothing. Nothing. It has almost no real effect. Certainly, it doesn't do anything to the way it looks. It doesn't do anything the way it functions. You would actually have to rewrite the codes well, first of all, the one thing that would help is if they forced, let's say, Walmart to pave the surface of the parking lot with a permeable asphalt. But it costs more money. That would help. But so much of this, the way that landscape is applied is absolutely superficial. That won't help at all. I mean, I think what we can do is actually try to lobby and be more articulate and try to explain why the incorporation of a systematic approach to regeneration of cities and how to incorporate landscapes in a meaningful way and what that really means. We have to teach, and then we have to try to show by example where we can. But, I mean, frankly, I won't, unless they want me to paint the parking lot, I wouldn't waste my time on it.
I asked that question because Istanbul currently is undergoing massive urbanization where a lot of shopping centers and underground parking lots are being built, so it has become an issue.
Well, then what I would say is that somebody should actually make sure that the developers invest in digging a deep enough hole so that the landscape can be at the same level as the ground plane, as the street level, because people tend not to use spaces that are up or down, and put enough steel into it so that you can plant trees. Trees need about 1.2 meters of soil, and they're required to do that. So even if it isn't a great design, at least it can be a part of the streetscape and part of the city. The other thing is that, and I know this is an issue in China, where this typology where you have kind of a Corbusian tower with a tutu, a little skirt of green, doesn't do anything, really. It separates everybody from the city, it detracts from street life. The landscape really needs to be thought of in a more systematic way.
Sorular alayım. Varsa sorular. Mikrofon geliyor.
Can you hear me? Okay. Just want to ask a quick question. When you brought those trees to Abu Dhabi, what were you thinking about the invasion of the trees, like Australian pine in Florida?
Okay. We only use indigenous species. I mean,
I understand, but
yeah, what you mean in terms of what happens if they kind of reseed?
did I understand it wrong? Did you bring them from somewhere else or from the desert?
We had to import them from other nurseries that were in the UAE that had grown them.
Okay.
But
when you said shipped, I'm sorry.
Yeah, but the thing is that in order to really be sustainable, you don't want to use any energy to ship them in. But we did, because that was a lesser of two evils.
Definitely, okay.
But I just want to say this is an interesting topic, because the date palms, we had a big argument. And the date palms actually use a lot of water. So in that sense, I was going down the wrong direction in terms of making it a sustainable landscape. But I argued with them because I said, well, look, I'll tell you what, you guys planted all these palm trees from the airport into the city. They do nothing. why don't you take those trees and put them in a place where people will actually benefit, and therefore you have a zero gain or loss in terms of water use. That upset them. But I thought it was, if you're going to actually have those trees, and they're going to create shade and make it an attractive place for people, then they're actually working.
I call them lollipop trees.
The palm trees? The lollipop trees.
They don't have any foliage, They just stick and little top on them.
Well, the date palms are pretty big lollipops.
Yes, but compared to the real, oak tree, real foliage trees.
Well, you won't find an oak tree out there. I mean, the real indigenous trees out there are very, very low and scrubby because they don't have enough water.
Soda? You mentioned aesthetic in your work. You mentioned attractive spaces and beauty and aesthetics, and you're working in these different cultures. How do you work out what is attractive and beautiful in one context to another one? Because these are very different. China, Arabia, Turkey, Northern Europe. What defines today for you? Is it a personal thing? Your values of what's beautiful?
It is a personal thing. Yes, it has to be. But what we always try to do is we always do a lot of looking and researching and talking and looking again and looking at art and also in China. I mean, we're always finding out kind of how things translate into their beliefs. Like, oh my God, we did a roof garden, and who knew that wearing a green hat was bad? Oh, this I just learned this week. I'm like, oh, a green hat. Shit. It's just like, why did we do a green hat? And so you try to learn and not do a green hat. You try to actually be sensitized to that. But on the other hand, there has to be something that is organizing all this, and that kind of goes through your own head, your own eyes, and I believe that it's important that it does go through that filter, because then it can be something as opposed to just pieces of observations that aren't hung together. I didn't say that very well, but...
This is not really expected of a landscape architect to do all of what you're speaking about. It's creating these attractive, beautiful areas. The role of the landscape architect, though, has started to be broader and have much more of a central role in a lot of buildings because they're just huge complexes. How would you define now in terms of, like you mentioned at the beginning of the project, it's important that the landscape architect, the architect, be there at the beginning. For the project, is that a sort of how do you gauge that importance today? Because there's also a reverse sort of criticism in that the landscape architects are being given too much. Like you in your debate with Will Alsop, I saw on the internet that he said there was too much being given to the landscape architects deciding, where everything was going to be. Like, what's the divide? What's the balance there? Optimal balance.
Well, I would have to say for a really, really long time, there wasn't much of a balance, and even still today, there isn't. Architects are still the primary port of call for doing master plans. Will was just being a bad boy because he likes being a bad boy, but I think that there is beginning to be a better balance. I mean, architects are, also understanding kind of the role of context. But I think, landscape architecture is the fastest growing design profession in the United States now. And it's always been a problem that the breadth of the profession is so wide, where you can go and do forest management as a landscape architect, or you can be a master planner, or you can focus on ecosystems, or you can, we always had a very difficult time defining who we are. And that hasn't changed. I mean, the landscape is a very broad topic, no pun intended, but it really is a very, very wide topic. So the fact is that we are just getting more ambitious, brighter, motivated people in the profession to start covering a lot of those bases. But I think the benefit, your first question, the benefit of actually having really having a more broad discussion about, let's say, site planning, it really helps because the environmental engineers know the technologies, they know the latest issues, they know what can be applied and can be done. They inform the architects about the system. So the architects certainly benefit by that kind of input. So do the landscape architects. But the landscape architects and the architects can be in a discussion. Well, what happens if you were to create this space here and move the building over here? What if you were to densify here or make it lower here? Then you X, Y, Z. So the dialogue creates a
Dialectic.
it opens up the discussion, and the developer does better.
Last question, probably there's a lot of young landscape architects here.
Yeah.
What do you recommend for somebody that's just starting out in landscape architecture? You know, what kind of advice do you have for, you know, students or young professionals that are interested in landscape architecture? What should they be focusing on? What things should they be concerned with now at the beginning of their professional careers?
Well, first of all, I always advise the same thing. Go and travel and see the world, number one, because you guys are in such an incredible time now. So go see the world. The other thing that we're really good at, that the architects still are not very good at, is integrative thinking. Really taking all this information and bringing it together and still making something out of it. That's what we're taught. We're taught to think about these different things, layering. So, you know, if you're going to focus on technology, that's going to be outdated. If you're going to focus on a particular computer program, at some point that's going to be outdated. But of course, learn Rhino and CAD. You know, and don't think, please don't think that design and art is not important, because in fact, I mean, just think about it. What kind of world are we building if we're not thinking about that? Art is really the flowering of a culture. That's what we humans do best. That's our highest kind of product, is producing literature and painting, sculpture, architecture, novels. I mean, these are so important to us, and that is what we're tasked to do. We're still being asked to make form and to build things. So focus on art, focus on design. Don't think that that's not important. It is. We need more.
Okay, biz başka soru yoksa tamam. Çok teşekkür, iyi akşamlar. Matematik.
Thank you very much.
Çok teşekkürler. Thank you very much Martha. Herkese çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu böyle bir akşamda yoğun bir katılım gösterdiğiniz için. Gökhan Bey'e, Martha SCHWARTZ'a, siz değerli katılımcılarımıza ve ana sponsorumuz Siemens Ev Aletlerine. Bildiğiniz gibi yemetkinlik.com ve iletişim sponsorlarımızdan da detaylı haberleri takip edebileceksiniz. Herkese afiyet olsun. Güzel bir ikramımız olacak. Hoşça kalın.